When you think of the Wild West, what comes to mind? Cowboys in big hats, tumbleweeds blowing down a dusty street, and two gunslingers facing off at high noon, right? We've all seen the movies, read the books, and grown up with this epic, romantic vision of the American frontier. But today, we're going to peel back the layers of legend and look at the world that truly was. Get ready to discover the real, gritty, and often surprising truth about life in the Wild West. Let's start with the most iconic image, the gunfight. Hollywood would have us believe that every town had a daily duel. The reality, not so much. While the West was certainly a rough place, organized, face-to-face duels were incredibly rare. Most gun violence was messy, chaotic, and often alcohol-fueled. Many frontier towns, like Dodge City and Tombstone, actually had strict gun control laws requiring visitors to check their firearms at the sheriff's office. The quick draw was more of a dime novel fantasy than a historical practice. A reliable shot was far more valuable than a fast one. So if they weren't all dueling, what was life like for the average person? In a word, hard. Forget the glamorous saloons and sprawling ranches for a moment. Most people who moved west were homesteaders, farmers trying to scratch a living from the unforgiving land. They lived in sod houses, literally built from bricks of prairie turf, because timber was scarce. They battled extreme weather, from blistering summers to bone-chilling blizzards, along with plagues of locusts that could devour an entire year's crop in a single day. Daily life was a constant struggle for survival, focused on essentials like finding clean water, growing food, and staying warm. It was a life of grueling labor, not high adventure. And what about the quintessential Western hero, the cowboy? The reality of the cowboy's job was far from the free-roaming, independent life portrayed on screen. Most cowboys were young men, often in their late teens or early 20s, who worked incredibly long hours for very low pay. Their main job was the cattle drive, a treacherous journey that could last for months. They spent up to 18 hours a day in the saddle, in all kinds of weather, dealing with stampedes, river crossings, and the constant threat of cattle rustlers. It was dirty, dangerous, and exhausting work. Furthermore, the image of the exclusively white cowboy is a myth. Historians estimate that as many as 1 in 4 cowboys was black, many of them former slaves seeking a new life after the Civil War. Many others were Mexican vaqueros, from whom American cowboys learned many of their essential skills. From roping techniques to the design of their saddles and boots, the entire era of the Wild West was incredibly brief, really only lasting from the end of the Civil War in 1865 to about 1900, and what truly shaped it, and ultimately ended it, wasn't a gunfighter, but a machine. The railroad. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, was the internet of its day. It connected the East Coast to the West, allowing people and goods to travel in days instead of months. It fueled westward expansion, created new towns overnight, and made the long cattle drives obsolete, as cattle could be loaded onto trains closer to the ranches. The railroad brought civilization, law, order, and commerce, and in doing so, it tamed the very wildness that defined the era. Of course, we can't talk about the West without mentioning the legendary outlaws. Figures like Billy the Kid and Jesse James have become folk heroes, but their real lives were far from heroic. Billy the Kid, whose real name was likely Henry McCarty, wasn't a cold-blooded killer fighting for justice. He was a young man caught up in a violent territorial conflict known as the Lincoln County War. While he was a skilled gunman, most of his killings happened in the context of that feud, not in random acts of banditry. He was a product of a lawless environment, a teenage delinquent who died at the age of 21. Similarly, Jesse James was often portrayed as a Robin Hood figure, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. This was largely propaganda that he and his supporters created. In reality, James was a former Confederate guerrilla who continued his fight after the Civil War. His gang robbed banks, trains, and stagecoaches with brutal violence, terrorizing civilians and killing those who stood in their way. They were not noble rebels. They were dangerous criminals. The legends that grew around them were a way for people to make sense of the chaos and violence of the time. But there's a crucial and often overlooked part of this story. The land that homesteaders and cowboys were moving into was not empty. It was the ancestral home of hundreds of Native American nations, each with its own rich culture, language, and history. The story of westward expansion is also a story of displacement, broken treaties, and devastating conflict. The taming of the West came at an immense cost to its original inhabitants. The destruction of the buffalo herds, a primary source of food, shelter, and spiritual significance for many Plains tribes, was a deliberate strategy to force them onto reservations. Battles like the one at Little Bighorn, where Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors defeated Custer's 7th Cavalry, were desperate attempts to defend their way of life against overwhelming force. It is a tragic and vital part of the history that is often sanitized or ignored in classic westerns. Understanding the Wild West means understanding this loss and its lasting impact on Native American communities. So, the Wild West was not a simple tale of good versus evil. Cowboys versus Indians. It was a complex, contradictory, and fascinating period of American history. It was a time of incredible hardship and breathtaking opportunity. It was a world of sodbusters, not just gunslingers, of diverse cowboys, not just white heroes, of the transformative power of the railroad, not just the drama of the saloon. The romantic myths are entertaining, but the reality is so much richer and more human. It's a story of struggle, survival, and the collision of cultures that fundamentally shaped the America we know today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time to the real Wild West. I hope it gave you a new perspective on this iconic era. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments which myth about the Wild West surprised you the most. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.